Test. Okay. Good afternoon. Welcome to today's forum. My name is Arden Cook. I'm a student forum host at the Hinckley Institute of Politics. The Hinckley Institute of Politics is a nonpartisan institute at the University of Utah. The Hinckley Forums seek to foster public discourse and civil debate on the most current and pressing issues, bringing local, national, and international thought leaders. Today's forum is presented in partnership with Better Utah Institute and the Utah Taxpayers Association. The Better Utah Institute is a nonpartisan nonprofit that educates Utahns on issues of public concern and increases civic engagement. They focus on civic engagement and good governance. The nonpartisan Utah Taxpayers Association has advocated lower taxes and sound tax policy since 1922. They represent thousands of businesses and individuals as an independent authority on state and local tax policy. If after today's panel, you want to learn more about the issues and perspectives discussed today, we encourage you to explore these groups, as well as the groups affiliated with our other panelists. We also want to express our thanks to Elizabeth Hutchings for her help in organizing this forum. Today's forum is titled, What's on Your Ballot? Constitutional Amendment A, Income Tax and Education. And we are excited to be joined by some great panelists who represent groups that have taken stances on this amendment that will appear on Utahns' ballots this November. Renee Pinkney is the president of Utah Education Association and social studies teacher. She was elected by her fellow educators in a statewide vote in early 2022 to serve a 3-year term as president of the 18,000-member Utah Education Association. Her term began July 15th, 2022. Ms. Pinkney has taught in Utah public schools since 1995. She served as UEA vice president from 2019 to 2022 and as a member of the UEA board of directors representing the Eastern Utah UniServe from 2016 to 2019. Billy Hesterman is the president of the Utah Taxpayers Association. Mr. Hesterman previously served as vice president of the Utah Taxpayers Association from 2014 to 2018. He has spent the last 6 years as lobbyist for Holland & Hart, focusing on lobbying, communication, and advocacy that yield strong results for clients across numerous industries at the Utah State Capitol. Prior to joining Holland & Hart, Mr. Hesterman was the vice president of the Utah Taxpayers Association, where his responsibility included communications, public relations, fundraising, and lobbying. He also covered Utah State's Capitol for 4 years at the Daily Herald in Provo, Utah. His beat at the Daily newspaper included the state legislature, the governor's office, the county commission, as well as the statewide and local elections. He started his career as a communications assistant in the Utah Senate. Mo Hickey is the executive director of Voices for Utah Children. He has spent years passionately developing early education opportunities in Summit County and deeply understands Utah's education system. As president and member of the Park City School Board, Mr. Hickey advocated for solutions that would better support students, teachers, and Park City's growing community. Served as the vice executive director of Voices for Utah Children since June 2019, Voices is a policy and advocacy organization that works on behalf of children across the state of Utah. They focus on education, early care, healthcare, immigrant family policy, and revenue and taxation. And finally, Kevin Green is the Utah State Director for Americans for Prosperity. Mr. Green joined Americans for Prosperity in Utah in 2018 as policy director and most recently served as deputy state director. Americans for Prosperity is a grassroots organization that believes freedom and opportunity are the keys to unleashing prosperity for all. The state chapter is committed to Utah's continued success as one of the best managed states in the country and as one of the best places to live for its residents. They work with local policymakers across the state and bring in positive changes that remove barriers to all Utahns, allowing them to live their American dream. Today's conversation will be moderated by Laura Jones of KRCL. I'll turn it over to her to get started. Thank you.
I thank you so much and for being here. I hope it wasn't just the pizza, that you are interested in politics. I'm guessing because we're in the House of Hinckley, you are. KRCL has been around since 1979, celebrating our 45th anniversary, started by a small group of anti-war protesters, civil rights agitators, and so forth, and keeping up that tradition here in 2024. So 90.9 stickers out there, please avail yourself. So we have, let's go left to right. We got Renee, we got Mo, we got Kevin, we got Billy. So you know who's who. But let's talk Amendment A. I've got a little summary here for you. First of all, clap if you know what Amendment A is. Okay? Clap if you're for Amendment A. Clap if you're against Amendment A. All right, we're going to have a good discussion here. Constitutional, I'm sorry, what? Undecided. Clap louder. Constitutional Amendment A asks voters if they'd like to remove the earmark on state income tax that reserves its use to public education, higher education, and services for children and people with disabilities. So if voters approve the amendment to the Constitution lifting this earmark, state lawmakers are saying they'll eliminate the state, not saying, they will eliminate the state portion of the sales tax on food. So let's start with our panelists giving us their take on this amendment, pro and con. Renee, you want to go first?
Sure. Oh, I have a mic. I'm mic'd up. I forgot.
And are we rolling? Can we hear the panelists?
Yes, can you hear me okay? Okay, our take on Constitutional Amendment A is that we are against the Constitutional Amendment. We believe that this is a power grab by the legislature, that this will expand private religious school voucher funding, and we have seen a pattern since 2023 and then 2024, and what is expected in 2025 that leads us to that conclusion. We also believe that if we open up the income tax to other state needs, one of those state needs is the voucher program, but it could also be used for politician pet projects. And it will no longer be a protected source or a mandate in the Constitution for public education.
Thank you, Renee. I'm going to jump around because I kind of think Mo is on your side of the fence here. So Billy Hesterman, Utah Taxpayers Association, what's the take?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you for having us. We're here in support of the amendment. We believe there's a lot of wonderful things that can come from this. One being the freedom in the budget. It's been a long principle for the Taxpayers Association to not have earmarks in a budget. So whether it's an earmark for roads, an earmark for parks and zoos, or an earmark for whatever it might be, pick your favorite project that's important to you. We support all those things, but we feel like it's up to the elected officials whom you all elected and put in place and put in charge of those budgets to find the best places, the best uses for that money. And so this is allowing our legislators to do that. It's going to allow them to have their hands untied in the budget, take off the pressure on different aspects of the budget, and let them put the money where the most important needs are. And I would contend it's going to stay right there where it is. It's going to stay with education. That is an important need in this state. We need strong education system. We need students that are ready to take the jobs of tomorrow. We need these teachers to be sure to make sure that they're taking care of the appropriate ways, that they have a good paying job, that they have a stable future. These are all things that we know that will be accomplished and can still be accomplished without this earmark. There's only 8 other states that have some kind of earmark that's similar to this, and they're doing just fine. The other 42 are doing just fine in funding their education. So to say that if we somehow get rid of this, that's going to become a problem, I just don't buy that. And then with it also is the decrease of the sales tax on food. Now, I just want to make clear, this will not eliminate all sales taxes on food. It just eliminates the state portion of it. So you'll still pay a city portion and a county portion of sales tax on your food, but it will be at least cheaper and a little bit more affordable for you, as we are in times when food costs a lot more than we are used to it costing. So we're in favor of them. We look forward to discussing more throughout the hour.
Mo Hickey, Voices for Utah Children.
Yeah, first off, thanks for having us here. We're opposed to this amendment for a number of reasons. One of the things we focus on is policy and good policy. And what we're seeing is taking away an earmark that has protected education. And if you follow the trail of the historical funding, Utah ranks 49th presently on per pupil funding. We've moved out of 50th, which we've been in for a long time. Not because we've done anything much better, because Idaho's done much worse. So let's set the stage there. Secondly, I was just on a panel with former state treasurer, and it's really interesting because we have certain needs in the state, and they're not being met already. And one of the things he said was he was being yelled at by a legislator last year because the money had gone to housing and not to other social services. And he said, and we have to make these decisions. And I was like, well, the decision we're making is to cut taxes, which is reducing revenues, and then claiming we can't fund these needs. Taking this earmark off is going to open that up to this whole conversation. We had a budget last year where, with other advocates across the state, not just for children, but for other social needs, housing, homelessness, there were unmet needs of $3.2 billion. Now, I'm not naive in thinking we're going to meet all those needs in 1 year. But when you take a look at that amount of need in the state that's not being addressed, and saying we're going to open up this one source of funding for education and meet all these other needs, I guess my question is, if you trust them to do the right thing, then support the amendment.
All right, Kevin Green from Americans for Prosperity, Utah.
Yeah, I mean, similar to Billy, I think fundamentally it's a better way to budget where all receipts come in and then the legislature who we elect and then through future elections can hold accountable, determine what are the priorities that we're spending our money on. And also to Billy's point, the vast majority of states do not have this requirement in their constitution, and they all fund education. And to Mo's point, higher per pupil than we do without a constitutional mandate. I also think it's important to note within the constitutional change, there is still a mandate to create a legislative or a structure to fund education. And then once all of those things are met, you can then use whatever is remaining in the budget for alternative sources. So I think education is still remaining protected. It is a thing that our state needs to invest in. I think year after year, they continue to increase funding for education, maintaining it as a priority for our state. But the income tax is where year after year we see surpluses, and though other things that are out of the general fund take a lower priority because we can't fund them because that money is currently earmarked for something else. So I think it just opens up the budget to fund the priorities of the state while I think maintaining protections for education funding, because there is no state in the country that is not funding education without this earmark.
So, Kevin, we're going to stay with you.
Yep.
Lawmakers have said they intend to hold harmless education funding, yet those two words, hold harmless, are not in the amendment. So why should voters trust that they will truly hold harmless education funding, especially when we're, Mo, 49th in the country?
So I'll address the 49th first. So the per pupil funding, I think, is a bad way to look at prioritization of education, because we may be 49th, but Utah has much larger families than average, and the amount of taxes you would have to increase to match, say, a state like New York, who is I think the highest per pupil funding, would just be insane. But Utah just recently was ranked #2 in education in the country. So we are getting outcomes for a smaller amount of money that I think other states wish they could see, with 2-3 times the amount of education spending per pupil. So I do not think per pupil funding is the way we should look at if it's a proper investment in education. To the hold harmless, though, there is a trigger bill that was passed last year that, if the constitutional amendment is passed, will go into effect, that holds harmless with, there is a declining student population in Utah's schools, and that bill will maintain current funding levels without decrease. So the WPU, so the weighted pupil unit, which is the per funding per student, will actually increase as Utah's student population and public school system declines. So that is the hold harmless. And right, you can't do that if then the alternative is to gut education funding. So I think that bill, which that HB 294 or something from last year, so I would look that up. But that is, if this is passed, we are holding education funding harmless.
HB 394, hold harmless for public education enrollment decline. That #2 ranking, what was the source or the metric?
U.S. News and
USA Today.
Yeah.
And do you know what the metric was?
It was a whole
bunch of stuff. Okay.
Yeah.
Mo, you want to go next on this?
Yeah, I'll just go back to that for a second, because one of the highest rankings we got was on the low cost of higher education in the state of Utah. At Voices, we publish a book every year with our partners from the Annie Casey Foundation. And Utah has done well educationally, and a big part of that has been our demographic makeup. If you look at states that have largely Caucasian populations, they've overall done better over time because of the resources in those states. We're seeing a decline in our numbers, and there are all different ratings out there, and it hasn't been dramatic, but we've gone from, when I joined Voices 5 years ago, we were 3rd in the country, we're down to 14th now in education. It's been a slow drip. So that concerns me. As far as the hold harmless language doesn't guarantee any of this. And one thing I've learned with certainly our current legislature, but in my time dealing with the legislature, and prior to joining Voices, I spent 2 terms on the Park City School Board, and we dealt with them quite often there, is a statute can be changed immediately. So we could actually have the statute go into effect, and we could have an interim session like they're having today, and just vote to eliminate the statute. So the hold harmless, to me, carries very little weight at the moment. If it was so important to have a hold harmless, I would say it should be put into the constitutional amendment. Secondly, with the declining enrollment piece, what worries me about that is there is no real language that guarantees the WPU. It's in there that will hold harmless. We're going to set aside a reserve fund. But think about the logic of this. If you have 23 kids in a class and one kid, you have one less because we have declining enrollment, we're not eliminating a whole class. We're not getting rid of that teacher. We're not taking a piece out of a building and removing it. Those costs remain in place. So it's disingenuous from the legislative standpoint to say we're going to hold education harmless when we really don't have a plan to how to address those needs.
Billy Hesterman, Taxpayers Association.
So I would say with that, that's the point of why we have elected officials and we have a budget, and that they are supposed to come in and fulfill those promises that they made. And if they don't, then as I've often said to people, I say, this is your chance to vote the bums out. And I hope that many of you would. If they feel like that they're not fulfilling the promises that they've made to you, then we need to put in ones that will. And that's the key to this, is that we're now putting actual, for lack of a better term, live ammo in their hands and telling them they need to make sure they're doing the right things with it. And that's what we're advocating for. We want the opportunity for our legislators to show us that they can do the right things. And we believe that that's going to lead to a better budget, it's going to lead to a better tax program that we have here in the state, and it's going to lead to a better education system. Is let's give them the tools that they need to be able to succeed, and instead of tying their hands and saying, this money only can go here, it can't go there. Let's ensure that everyone has an opportunity to compete and make their case. And I believe that the education case will be a strong one that gets made.
Renee Pinkney, UEA President. Hold
Well,
harmless and such.
Hold harmless. So in terms of holding education harmless, in my mind, when you say you will hold education harmless, you are recognizing that if you didn't, you would do harm. And that is something that does not sit well, clearly, with someone who has been in public education for 30 years. And I also believe that in terms of voting the bums out, we know that our districts are gerrymandered, and that it is very difficult to vote them out of office, and that is by design. And I'm a government teacher, so this is something that I also feel very strongly about, that we need to have fair elections so that my vote counts and your vote counts, and we all are electing people who will represent our interests. I also believe that if the constitutional amendment was so ironclad, why do you have to have, if you approve this constitutional amendment, then here's what we're going to do for you, right? And those 2 statutes that would go into effect can be changed very easily. And Senator Milner said that in a recent article, that these statutes can be changed. And we know that HB 357, which is the bill that went into effect with Constitutional Amendment G, that was the last amendment in 2020, it says that If we allowed the income tax funds to be used for children and individuals with disabilities, then we will cover the inflationary factor in the base budget for public education, higher ed, and children and individuals with disabilities. That we will cover student growth, that we will create a stabilization account. That is status quo. That should be done already. And so when we are now asked to put that HB 357 into the Constitution, because statute can easily be changed, that makes you wonder, so if the constitutional amendment doesn't pass, are you going to change that statute and quit covering the inflationary factor, quit covering student growth, and no longer maintain the stabilization account?
Renee, I wanted to ask you about ranking Utah education, as Kevin was talking about. While we're 49th by a weighted pupil unit, apparently, USA Today says we're second in the country with education. What do your constituents, the teachers, the 18,000 folks you represent, what is their feedback on this and the quality of education they're able to deliver under current funding mechanisms?
Well, we know that our students have increased needs. All you have to do is look at society and the complexities and complications in society. All of those challenges that we face as a society come into our classrooms. And we know that a global pandemic has had a huge impact on our students, and that the needs that we are seeing now, and we've heard all about, the mental health crisis, and I can personally attest to that. I was in the classroom, and the students need more one-on-one attention. Their needs are so great, and when you have a class of 32 kids, and you have kids in that class who might be experiencing homelessness, who might be experiencing food insecurity, who are wondering if their parents are going to get divorced or not, if there's a lot of, I want to say anxiety in their lives, they have a very difficult time learning, right? Or if they are experiencing suicidal ideation. And so when we are looking at these rankings, number one, it's very interesting when you go through the different ways the different metrics that are used in order to determine where we are as far as the country. But teachers are feeling the impacts, students are feeling the impacts. We need to have more counselors, we need to have more psychologists, more social workers. We need to be able to help kids who had learning gaps when the pandemic was raging, where the opportunities just weren't there anymore. They maybe didn't have parent support at home because they were watching younger kids. So when we're looking at the rankings, that's not what we're feeling in our classrooms.
All right. Kevin, Billy, Mo, anybody want to get in on that as well or respond? All right, let's go to flexibility. The legislature could do this in other ways. Why, can we talk about some of those? And Billy, Taxpayers Association, I'm sure you've thought about this.
Sure. So I'm all for flexibility, and this certainly isn't the only earmark in the budget that I'd like to see changes to. We earmark a lot of money in the general fund to go to roads. I think there's ways to fund our roads differently. I'm open to all the conversations on how to add flexibility to the budget. What I think the key is to this amendment is that this actually, in my opinion, adds transparency to how this budget is crafted. We're actually going to know what's being spent and where. It's not hard for them to use something like higher education as the sifter that they can move back and forth between the income tax fund and the general fund. And they can say, well, we don't want to use as much general money, so we're going to push it, higher ed more into the income tax money, or slide it back the other way. And so now if we're able to say, well, we're just going to get rid of that earmark and allow you guys to fund it how you need to fund it, I believe that adds transparency to the taxpayer of how the money is being spent. And we don't have to get lost in battles of where did it come from or who's paying for it, but we can just see that We saw a need, it got funded, this is how much it was, and this is where it came from. And that's what I like seeing in our state budgets, and I guess carry it down to the county and city and school district budgets. We all want a clearer path on where it came from and how it's being spent.
Anyone else like to comment on that? Kevin?
No, I mean, I agree. I think transparency and then accountability is what, like, this is not the end all be all on what I think budgeting should be. So, but I think it's a good step in transparency and then accountability, because I think every dollar that the state takes from us and then spends should be justified. And I think across the board, I think this is a good step to get to that type of budget.
All right, hey Mo, I've got a question for you based on data from Voices for Utah Children. Income tax cuts since 2018 have resulted in revenue losses of over $800 million, just over $500 million of that revenue taken from the income tax fund in the past 3 years. Can you respond to that in the context of this conversation?
Well, I want to go back to the transparency thing. This is probably something we all agree on. I'd like to see transparency. I'd really like to see transparency. If anybody listened to the governor's debate last week, one of my favorite lines in the debate was, if you saw what happened behind closed doors from our current governor, that worries me, right? And if you go up to the Capitol, it really worries you when you see that a lot of these discussions are not taking place and not being transparent. Going back to the cuts in the income tax, what I'll say is, prior to my joining the nonprofit world, I actually spent 25 years in international finance. I would love to see us as a state, and we actually asked the governor when he got elected last time to do this, which is to actually take a step back and develop a plan like you would for any other entity. I don't believe we have a tax plan. I don't believe we have a true education plan at the moment. If we did, we'd be sitting there saying, as a business, you wouldn't say, let's underfund our most valuable resource, which is children. You'd be saying, that's our most valuable resource, let's put some money into that. Let's build on the future. Let's make sure that, for example, we had a bill a couple of years ago to make sure that all children had access to health insurance. That bill cost the state $4 million and saved $54 million per year. And we had to fight for 3 years to get to that point, right? So I think there's a lot of things we can do to have the transparency about how the budget process works, but we should be, as a state, prioritizing what the needs of the state are, where we're looking to be 20 years down the road. And we've constantly been cutting income tax without having a plan on how we're going to make up the difference. And former Senator Stevenson and I, who disagreed on a lot of things when he was in the Senate, but one thing we agreed on is if you squeeze the sausage in the middle, it's coming out one of the ends. And that's what we're seeing right now. As you're cutting income tax consistently, yes, we may be putting more money into education right now, but we're losing on the other side. We're not providing the social services that Renee talked about. We're not meeting the needs of the students. Utah still has, we travel the whole state. We have one of the worst childcare systems in the country at the moment, which is not funded. We have 0 pre-K programs that are being funded really by the state. They're all funded at the local level. And we have the highest rate of teen suicide per capita still in the country. Those are the things we're hearing about. And we're not investing into those areas so that we can see the outcomes. And I would argue, it's not my report, it's the Heckler report, is if you invest in pre-K, as an example, you get a $14 return on every dollar you invest in pre-K over the lifetime of that child. I would like to see us actually develop a plan that addresses the needs of the state first, and then look at what the budgetary needs are.
And that's where I want to go for our final question before a question and answer from students and the general audience. And that is, wave your wand and tell us how you would fix education, whether it's this amendment or other ideas that you or your organization has. And I do want to mention, you mentioned Howard Stevenson, former leader of the Utah Taxpayer Association. So we'll start with Billy.
Always good to have a mention of Howard. So I think I would start in the property tax system. I do think it's an unfair system that we have, that so much of the money that goes into education is dictated by what zip code children live in, and that I would look for a way to more equalize that funding between all the students across the state. There's no reason why a student living in Park City gets a better education than a student living in Tooele. I think that that's just disturbing as a resident of Utah. And it's only, I know the arguments made by those who say, well, we pay it, we live in Park City, we choose to live there, so we get the schools we want. But I also would say, but I think we can all benefit from the public good of having, our students across the state having that, that funding discrepancy between those two districts be made up. So I would look for, ways and avenues that we can really equalize that property tax payment so that it goes to students equally and not favoring the rich districts over the other. I would also look at ways that we could delve into from the income tax side at the state legislature, that we really do look into the budgets, the budgets of the districts, and look for the fat. I know my wife's a school teacher. I have 3 kids in the Jordan School District. I know that it's lean. I know that there aren't a ton of things you can look at and cut, but there are things I do believe are out there in any government program. You can say, this is probably not reaching the mark of what we want it to do anymore. Let's reevaluate it. Let's see if there's a way to be innovative and disrupt what we've been doing in the past and see if we can find something better to use that money for. I think we need to be visionaries. We need to have goals of what we want to accomplish. And when we do that, I think we'll have a really great public education system here in Utah.
Renee Pinkney, UEA President.
Thank you. So we believe that every child, no matter their color, their background, who they are, or where they live, should attend a welcoming, safe, well-resourced classroom where their curiosity and creativity can come alive. So bottom line, we want all of our students and educators to have what they need when they need it so they can thrive, and that requires a fully funded public education system that is not competing with a voucher program. So as we have watched in 2023, House Bill 215, when it passed and created a voucher program, that was a power grab. They had a $40 million appropriation for that session from the income tax fund. In January 2024, they asked for another $150 million to expand the voucher program that had not started yet. Now, they didn't get $150 million, they received $42.5. So going into this school year, $82.5 million was allocated for the voucher program. And we understand one of the primary lobbyists who lobbied for that voucher program is going to ask for a $200 million expansion of the voucher program for unaccountable, private, religious vouchers for anyone who wants them. And it will no longer be based, according to this lobbyist, it will no longer be based on low income. It will be for anyone, any socioeconomic status, right? So that to us signals that when you open up the income tax fund, you now have another state need that has to be funded, and that would be, conflict with funding public education. And so when we're talking about education, and we just use that statement, and our legislators say that education is their top priority, I want to ask which one? The private religious school voucher program or public education? And I can't believe that we are being asked to give up funding for our kids, for their future happiness, for convenience in budgeting. That to me is really galling. And so our perfect world, a fully funded public education system where students and educators have what they need when they need it so that they can thrive and reach their full potential.
Thank you. Kevin Green, Americans for Prosperity, Utah.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with everything Renee just said, except for the fact that it has to be isolated to a public education system. I think children are unique. Every single one of them is different. And I think the state should prioritize funding an education that works for every single student. I'm public education from kindergarten to grad school here at the U. It worked for me. There are thousands of children across the state that it does not work for, and their parents currently pay income tax and property tax and can then not afford the alternative options that they need. So I love our voucher program, or the Utah Fits All Scholarship, as it's actually called, and providing that educational environment that meets the needs of every single unique child. And I think that is very true in public education, and I think there's a lot of reforms that need to be made so that teachers can actually be teaching. I think there's a lot of bureaucratic nonsense from the state legislature all the way down to the district level and the administration that prevents teachers from actually doing that, and so that all has to be addressed. But I think education as a whole is to meet the needs of each individual unique child so that they can thrive, so that they can achieve their happiness, because that is not always attainable in a one-size-fits-all system. So that is my magic wand.
Thank you. And Mo Hickey, Voices for Utah Children.
I get to get the last word. This is good.
Our mics are still on.
Yeah, I know the mics. I'll go back. First off, going back to the Park City situation, and I would agree with you. And when I was on the board in Park City, it's interesting. So just in case people don't know this, Utah gets ranked #1 in one thing in education and one thing only, and that's equalization. The income tax goes to across the state. One of the things that I always advocated for was, I'm in favor of equalization if the money is going to districts that need it. I was very happy if money was going to Paiute or Wayne County. I was not happy when it was going to other districts that were actually lowering their local property tax to offset the growth factor. Park City this current year, this is not being advertised, is sending an additional $30 million out of local property tax back to the state to fund other programs in other districts. That's not equalization, that's actually taxation without representation. So I would argue that yes, we need to have a fair system, but the fair system means everybody has to make an effort, #1. #2, then the money has to go to districts that are actually in need. I was meeting with a representative from Provo recently, and Provo, in about 2 years, will not really have a local property tax base. Right? If you go down to Provo now, we're opening up a new medical school. BYU bought the land there. BYU is not a property taxpayer. I'm not criticizing BYU. I'm making a point that as we put money into nonprofit entities in Provo, we're losing the property tax base. Provo will be a net taker in about 2 years because they have needs, right? So I would argue that point. On the voucher point, I'm going to make a statement that given the current environment of ballot initiatives might or might not be popular, I would propose that we have a ballot initiative next year on vouchers. If we really want to bring it to the public and find out where we stand on this, and it's a little bit of a biased suggestion because vouchers have not passed any place in the country when they've been put on the ballot, including in Utah. My first year on the school board was, I waded right into the voucher debate that first year, and it failed miserably. And the reason it failed, especially in Utah, in my view, is we do not have a private school system in Utah. I'm originally from New York. In New York, you have private schools on every other corner. In Utah, we have 700,000 children 2 years ago in K-12 age group. Out of that 790,000, less than 10,000 went to private schools in Utah. Parents have made a choice. The community has made a choice. The current vouchers are going directly to, and the report was starting to come out yesterday, even though we're not going to get an audit for 2 years. The money is going to homeschooling, it's going to micro schools, it's going to extracurricular activities, which I could go into a whole diatribe about how that's causing problems for districts because parents are taking the money for extracurricular activities and now coming back to their home district and asking to take classes there. So I think we need to, I'll finish on this. What needs to be done in education, we need to raise the income tax, increase the funding for education, including higher education, and meet the social services needs of our state.
All right, thank you, panelists. We have about 10 minutes left for questions. I want to go to students first. I'm guessing you're students. Here, use this microphone.
Hi, thank you very much for coming. The question is for Billy. I wanted to, you said that this is our chance and this is our opportunity to trust our elected representatives. As a non-religious affiliated middle-class person, in the last 10 years, give us an example of what you think has been a reason why we should keep trusting our elected representatives. And as the lady in the far left said, we are highly gerrymandered. We do not get to elect our representatives. We do not really have like a just representation of anything. So in the given case of like us not having a vote that counts, but we have elected representatives, what do you think has been a instance of these representatives actually working for the people and not corporations, not the ultra wealthy, simple, non-religious affiliated middle-class people? And I mean, of course, I mean, most of the people are religious affiliated, but I mean, like,
Fair. Okay. So I would say we have to look at, my understanding is of when Amendment G passed, I believe 4 years ago, what we've seen in the increased amount of funding that we've had in education. I believe it's been over $1 billion, probably 1.4, I want to say, maybe 1.3. And then when you look at what was done between 2010 and 2020, that increase was only about $1 billion. So even in the last 4 years, we've already reached what we did the decade prior. So I think that's something we can look at and say, they're putting their money where their mouth is, where they believe in education and they want to fund it and make sure that it has what it needs. When I hear the phrase, we want a fully funded education system, I would ask, what is that number? And justify it, and then let's go get it. I have yet to hear any government program, this is not just a hit on education, but any government program stand up and say, we've got enough, we've reached it, we have accomplished what the goals were, and we don't need any more. You take it and go use it somewhere else. That's just not what happens in government funding, and that's okay. That's part of how the system works. So I would like to, hear what that number is, what the target is. Let's figure that out and let's get there. But we never get that number given to us. And then finally, as far as the representation, I understand what this is a supermajority state. I'm not blind to that. I'm not blind to the fact that we do have voices that feel unseen and people that think that they're not heard. And I respect that, and I think that that's a legitimate concern. But I also would argue that then we need groups to be involved. We need you to stand up and make your voice heard, whatever that might be. And it takes time. It took time for a supermajority to be built. It's going to take time to tear something like that down if that's what the people want to have happen. And so I would encourage everyone in this room to not give up, not have apathy. That's the worst thing I think we can have in our government system, is people being apathetic to what's happening at the state capitol. It's easy for us to forget about it. We care about what happens in DC. We care about maybe what's happening at City Hall. But I bet if you went and asked 10 people, who is your state legislator? I'm almost willing to bet 9 out of 10, if not 10 out of 10, couldn't tell you what their name is. So we need people to care, and we need more people to not be apathetic about what's happening at the Capitol, and I think that'll improve a lot of the ability for us to vote the bums out, as I like to say.
Hi, I'm Ben. I'm a political science student here at the U. You have openly said that the point of the amendment is to allow the legislature to free up the budget to use it for their other priorities. That implies that they want to take that money away from education itself. Now, where do they want that intent to go? Where are their priorities? From what it seems like over the past few years, they want to do more when it comes to school vouchers. How do you justify that to Utah voters when it clearly looks like this is a method to circumnavigate the question of whether school vouchers should be a thing in Utah?
So I think vouchers is always used as a scary term, and the reality is the Utah Fits All program, the voucher program, is not siphoning money from public education. When it was passed 2 years ago, at the original amount, $40 million, and then they added another $40 million this year, the amount of money they were spending on public education also increased. That amount spent on Utah Fits All in its first year of passage is roughly equal to 1% or just under 1% of education funding in the state. So it was a minuscule portion. I know we hear $80 million, and I think that's a lot of money. But it is not this attempt to steal all of the money for public education to then give to private religious schools. I think even to Mo's point, there's only so many kids in private school, so if you gave a voucher to every single one of them, it's still a relatively small number of money, and I don't think that's the intention, and I don't think that's what would happen. So I think it's a scare tactic to say we're going to go all private vouchers and we're gutting public ed when the amount of money on public education is increasing year after year after year, while this alternative is also being provided to now 10,000 students who needed it. And there was 30,000 students who applied in the first year, so more than half did not receive a scholarship. So I think we should be looking at what are the needs for kids and what is their learning style, what is going to help them achieve success, and not simply what is the dollar amount for public education, because I don't think the dollar amount reflects success for all children.
Mohiki, quick response?
Yeah, I'd like to just, on the voucher and being a scare tactic, I think we have to go back and understand the history of vouchers in the United States. And I think that it gets too often overlooked. Vouchers started in 1958. The first attempt at vouchers in the United States was 1958 in Virginia. And it was in response to Brown versus Board of Education. The state of Virginia decided they were the last state that was going to have to integrate their schools. They decided to close every public school in Prince Harris County, the largest district in the state of Virginia. And they closed every public school for 4 years so that black students could not attend schools. They then started giving vouchers to Christian schools in Virginia. Arkansas thought it was such a good idea, and I'm naming states I personally do not want to live in. Arkansas decided it was such a good idea that they would close the whole state for 4 years, and they closed their whole public education system for 4 years. So the history of vouchers, number one, is tainted. The other thing I would say is we're hearing, and again, it's anecdotally, and I don't want to just focus on the anecdotes we're hearing. That's why we're asking for an annual audit if we're going to have a voucher program. Let's have an annual audit of that program and find out where the money's going. But if you look at the breakdown of where people have been given vouchers and what they're currently reporting to when the Trib was interviewing people, they're spending it on dance classes, they're spending it on trips to the zoo. It's not us, this is what's being reported. I'm really concerned that we're not looking at it as a program, and we're bringing a speaker from Michigan State University in November. One of the things that he's calling for, and which I would agree on, is the state has to report their testing results for all public schools. Private schools generally report because they want to attract students. Let's make all the vouchers, the students that are receiving vouchers have to report test scores equally. And then we'll see if the program's actually working.
All right, we've got 3 more questions. I know some of you need to leave. First, an online comment, because we are streaming it. Then we're going to go to the young woman in the white sweater, and then here.
Okay. The online question states, I remember a few years ago when there was public backlash to a tax reform bill that would have raised the grocery tax on Utahns. Is this effort at all related to the experience?
Maybe. I can't speak for the legislators that came up with the idea, but I think that there is an element of they saw that this is an important issue to voters and their constituents, and then took the opportunity to say, I guess we got this one wrong. Let's fix it and go do a course correction and do it the right way.
All right, let's go to the young woman right here.
Hi, my question actually was for Kevin, because you mentioned an increase in funding for education. If the current amendment allocates all those funds now to education, how will removing the earmark for the budget for other areas of the state actually increase the funding for education?
So if we remove it, how will that still allow for an increase? They could do it anyway, but if it's removed, then the entire budget, in theory, right, you could spend 100% of the budget on education if they wanted and figure out what to do with everything else. But I also think it's important to note, the constitutional mandate currently is income tax goes toward funding public education. But I don't know that it says every dollar in the income tax fund has to be spent on education each year, which is why every year they continue to decrease the income tax rate. And in theory, this upcoming session, they could drop that amount to zero. Like they could drop our state income tax rate to zero tomorrow, and they would have to figure out then, how to fund that. So I don't think eliminating the earmark prevents future increases in funding. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's my simple answer.
Go ahead.
5 things in 30 seconds.
And tell us who you are.
Rich Kendall, just been doing it. One of the reasons we don't have this business of what is it, how much money is it going to take? I go all the way back to the Scott Matheson era. We have no state plan for education in this state, and we have no funding plan for education in this state. There has been pushback and resistance to it ever since the days of Scott Matheson. That's really unfortunate because legislators don't want to commit. So, quickly, it does compete directly with public education. The enrolled copy of the voucher bill says right in the front line, all of the money is coming directly from income taxes. And that is the money that goes to public schools. Real quickly, why should 2 men be designated to write these amendments? Just 2 men. They farmed it out. We all know that. I know the consulting firm that they're using to farm this out and to get the language the way they want it. And it leads to the next question. Why is the language for Amendment A and D so tortured? It's just tortured. No one can understand it the way it's written. I think that's a real problem. There is a real credibility issue, and I'm going to come back to vouchers. The voucher bill was run in 10 days. There was not a single vote against it. It was a railroad job if I've ever seen one. And that's not deliberative. Now, there's a trope, I think. Well, you can vote them out. Boy, it's tough because of the incredible effort to gerrymander districts. I think my 30 seconds are up.
Okay. All right, Renee, you haven't had a chance to respond to some questions. Anything you'd like to respond to, either from one of our questioners?
Well, I want to articulate that the Constitution says all income tax. It is very hard to question what it means when it says all income tax shall be used to support K-12 higher ed children and individuals with disabilities. And when they tell me that they have a surplus and that they need to lower the income tax rate, I think, how on earth can you have a surplus when all income tax shall be used, right? So we have a great revenue source. We have a problem with distribution. And that goes right back to political will. And if there was a political will to fund public education at the levels that are necessary for all of our kids and our educators to succeed, then that would happen, right? Because there was a political will to get a voucher bill through in 10 days. Yeah, it was made public on January 16th. January 28th, it was signed into law. It was very anti-democratic. And in my mind, my view, a power grab. And that's what we're seeing.
All right, we started by asking folks if you'd heard about Amendment A, and now you all have. So clap if you're for Amendment A, meaning you support the amendment. Clap if you're against the amendment. And I think that includes our one undecided, right? Well, I want to say thank you to all of our panelists and for you being here and getting educated on what's going to be on your ballot. And thank you for being here. Have a great day.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Oh,
Nice job, Renee.
thank you.
Haven't seen you in a while.
I helped UEA on each of the other areas.
Oh,
I like to set up telephone calls with everyone.
okay.
I want you to